Welcome to Military Images Live. This is Ron Coddington, the editor and publisher of Military Images magazine. We are America's only magazine that is solely dedicated to Civil War portrait photography, and we've been doing it since 1979. It's our 40th year, and we're delighted to bring you episode 19 for this season. We're going to let a minute or so go by so folks can start joining us, and then we'll get into the meat of the program. And part of that is going to include a shout out to Mike Medhurst and Company. Mike is a dealer in fine images and documents. You can see his advertisement here. That is part of Military Images magazine. Mike is one of the finest dealers in the country, and he has been a great friend of the magazine and a great friend of the photo collecting community. So you might go check out Mike Medhurst's website and see if there's any treasure there for you. I see lots of emojis coming on right now, lots of thumbs up and thumbs up back at you. I really appreciate the support, and delighted to show you some of the interesting items that have crossed my plate over the last 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks since our last program, and I've spent a big chunk of that time working on the winter issue. So that means that my head is way down into the research and finding all interesting bits of information. And I'm going to share some of that with you tonight. Before we get into that, I do want to get into an image that appeared on Facebook in the last week on our page. And it's this photograph, which I think is quite great. It's from the Gary Pagal collection. Gary's a collector up in Wisconsin, and this particular image has not seen the light of day. Gary tells me for something like 30 or 40 years, since about the time Military Images magazine was founded. And there's some great things going on here. You've got his great coat that's nicely tinted, his breastplate, his waist belt plate. He has an Austrian Lorenz musket, all wonderful, wonderful equipment, crystal clear. The clarity is great. And what makes it even super special to me, which is hard to see if you're watching this on video, but on the underside of his visor of his cap, the underside is his company letter. If you look closely, you'll see an eye, a big brass eye that's on the bottom of that visor. So a real trendsetter for the 1860s, wearing his cap that way. So this was in the last issue of the magazine, and I put it on Facebook just because I thought it's such a great image and I want to share it with all of you. And I got a bunch of comments. My favorite comment comes from Patrick Price. He responded with this quote, which is really true. The only consistency in American Civil War uniforms is inconsistency. That comes with an exclamation point, and that's from Patrick Price's collection, or Patrick Price's post on this image from the Gary Pagal collection. So there is certainly some truth in that. We could go on. I could spend an entire program, several episodes, talking about why we have those inconsistencies. And those inconsistencies occurred both in the North and in the South. When you think about the way uniforms were contracted out in the individual states, how they were made, the patterns, the way the government stipulated their regulations, all of those play a part in this. So consistency, which was in the 19th century, was of a kind, is very different from consistency as we know it today. So we'll get into that in detail in other programs. But tonight, a tip of the cap to Patrick Price for giving me this quote, which I am probably going to steal and use in other places, or I should say borrow. So Patrick, if you're listening and watching tonight, thank you so much for reminding all of us of what consistency and inconsistency is all about. So, as I mentioned, had a lot of research going on the last couple of weeks, and one of the images that I was looking at is this one here, which is from the late Mike McAfee collection. Those of you who knew Mike or knew of Mike, perhaps own some of his books, know that he passed away this summer after a battle with cancer. And I'm still going through all the scans that I've made of Mike's collection over the last 5 years or so. And as I was going through them, this one came to my attention. And on the surface, it has very much all of the qualities of a really nice outdoor carte de visite. And you can clearly see in this detail, we're looking at what appears to be a city square. You can't avoid the rather tall monument that appears to be rather new. It's clean. There seems to be some fresh ground around it. And here you can see some hints of earth, some fresh earth that might have been shoveled over. Of course, you've got a great fence here. You've got wagons. You've got men and horses all around. Some of the buildings from downtown, some trees all around it. Great, great looking image. Now, you can also find that image. It's still, or pardon me, that monument is still here today. And it's located in Princeton, Indiana. And that becomes important here because, and I'm going to get to this here in two parts. The first part comes from a letter that was written on April 25th, 1863. So let's go from the 21st century back to the 19th century. And so we can set the backdrop for this. So we have a soldier in the 58th Indiana Infantry. His name is Willis T Inman. And he writes a letter. And this letter that he wrote was sent to his hometown newspaper for publication. This was not a letter home to mom and dad, not a letter to his girlfriend or his wife. This is a letter to the editor of the newspaper. And he starts it off with such regimental pride that it's fantastic. I'm going to read you the beginning of the letter. It says, "We are the best division in Rosecrans Army, and our regiment is the best in the division. The boys of the 50th Regiment Indiana Volunteers are proud of the regiment and their state." That's the beginning. Now, Willis goes on to say, this is a neat little note. He says a day earlier, so that would have been April 24th, 1863. And just to give you some perspective, the regiment forms in late 1861. So they're probably in uniform now for about a year and a half. And he goes on to describe how the colonel of the regiment was talking about raising money for a monument. There we go. Raising money for a monument. And in one day, they collected $700 in the first day. By the writing of this letter, they collected $700 for the monument. They needed $2,500 for the monument altogether. They eventually raised all this money and built the monument. It was erected on July 4th, dedicated on July 4th, 1865. So the war is over by that point, and the regiment is still in uniform. And so flash forward now from 1865 to 1914. Willis Inman is still alive. He's a veteran now. He's probably in his 70s. And in 1914, survivors from the 50th Indiana, they erect a tablet next to the monument that adds some additional detail. And here's what it says. It is the only monument in Indiana or in the United States that was erected and dedicated by any regiment in honor of its dead, while that regiment was still in the service, in the manner of its conception, in the manner and condition under which it was erected and dedicated. I love the closing. This monument is in a class by itself. Great stuff. So what I haven't done is due diligence to find out if indeed this statement on the tablet is true. I'm going to take it that the soldiers were correct and that it is, as they said it was, the earliest monument erected by a regiment that was still in the field. I suspect if one of you guys watching tonight is someone who is interested in Indiana history or wants to dig around a little bit in your books and on Google, you'll give me the answer. I haven't gone all the way in, but I love this. The quote, by the way, from Willis Inman's letter comes out of newspapers.com. I don't know that it's been published before, but it's a great, great letter. And a little footnote here, Willis Inman, he lived to see that tablet installed and lived 4 more years. He died in 1918. So a wonderful, wonderful story. Now, as we're still on the subject of quotes, I want to share with you this quote, and it relates to this scene. And for those of you who know the surrender, the story of the surrender in Appomattox, I believe this is not a correct likeness. This is not an accurate picture of the actual scene inside the McLean house in Appomattox on April 9th, 1865. This is Currier and Ives doing their what they thought was the right look. So there's that. Why am I talking about this particular lithograph right now? And why am I talking about Appomattox? It relates to an email that I received from the historian at the Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park. He's Patrick Schroeder. And we had an email exchange on some uniform details, some Zouave uniforms, about a week or so ago. And as we were having the exchange, I was replying, and as I was typing, I happened to notice the paragraph that was below his signature. It really caught my attention. So I'm going to read this to you because it's really powerful and it really is moving. It caught my attention in a big way. And so here it is. It says, "Here we are, some with whole skins, some with not so whole. Others have been left behind. For myself, I can only wonder that there is a bone left in my carcass when I think of the wholesale carnage through which I have passed. My bruises are inward. It is all over now, and I can only regard it as a hideous dream. The smoking ruins, the sodden field, the trailing banner, the slaughtered thousands and waiting families, the roar of the cannon, the rebel yell, and Yankee hurrah have all passed away, and we again return to peace." To read that at the bottom of Patrick's email, and then to find out who it's attributed to, the individual who wrote this quote is Private John W. Haley of the 17th Maine Infantry. He wrote this on June 9th, 1865. So I did a little poking around, and you'll be perhaps not surprised to know that a collection of Haley's letters appears in this book, The Rebel Yell and the Yankee Hurrah, which is taken from this quote that Patrick wrote here beneath the signature on his email. And a little more about John Haley. He was born in 1840, by the way. Great write-up on a local website in Maine. It says, I'm just going to read it to you because it's so nicely written. It says, John Haley, born 1840, loved reading, writing, history, and genealogy. Born and raised in the Twin Cities of Biddeford and Saco, Maine, he worked at the mills and served for 3 years with Company I of the 17th Maine Volunteer Regiment during the Civil War. Upon his return to the area after the war, he went on to work at the Saco and Biddeford Gas Light Company for 14 years before becoming librarian at the Dyer Library in 1892, a position he held for 28 years. He and his wife, Abby A. Batchelder, had 2 children, Adelaide and George. He died in 1921. So a nice biographical bit about Private Haley. This book, collection of his letters. I don't have the book. One thing I didn't find online was this photograph. That photograph may be in the book. If you've got a photograph of John W. Haley of the 17th Maine, let me know. I'm really curious to see what he looks like. Now, I've got one more quote for you to share. And It comes from this diary that I found transcribed online. And if you look closely, you'll notice this is a page from one of the pages from the diary. And you'll see this entire page is written in pencil, and we see parts of 3 different entries. These 2 entries are written where the lead is darker, it's definitely pressed down. The writing itself appears to be cursive. It's very, very nicely done. It's very, very easy to read. The writer of this diary kept his pencil sharp, so it preserves quite nicely. So we're looking here at May 31st, and then we look down, the next day is Wednesday, June 1st. And you can see a definite difference in the writing. It's still done in pencil, but in this case, the writing isn't quite as curved. The letters look slightly different, and whoever wrote this, you want to assume the diary writer, he didn't press down, or she did not press down quite as hard on the pencil. So the transcription of these diary pages, I'm not going to read May 31st, but I will read June 1st. He says, and I just gave it away, it's a man. He says, "An alarm last night. I had charge of the picket line on the left." Now, he's at Cold Harbor. It's June 1st, 1864. Been weeks of bloodshed and carnage as the Union and Confederate armies are grappling in what would wind up being the Siege of Petersburg, and then the Appomattox campaign that ended with the surrender that I talked about a little bit earlier from Patrick's writings. And here's what he says. "I had charge of the picket line on the left. This morning, the 16th, ordered to advance, carried the enemy's rifle pits, and advanced to the brow of the hill." Now, the writer is talking about the 16th. That's the 16th Michigan Infantry, who was part of the Union 5th Corps. So, this man says, "Advanced to the brow of the hill when I was shot in the right thigh." And he ends with a Shakespearean flourish. He says, "Alas, poor York." I think that he wrote this, but judging from the writing, it looks like it could be somebody else. So I wonder, was he injured so badly that he could not write? Did someone else, did he dictate this to someone? Really hard to say. But certainly the way it's written, he's using the pronoun I. We have to believe that either he wrote it or dictated it to somebody. What I'm not showing you here is the next page. There's 3 more entries, and I think these are interesting to read through quickly. June 2nd, this is the day after he was shot. He says, "Suffered terribly from my operation yesterday, the ball having passed through the flesh of the hip, going also entirely through the ilium bone. From this point, the surgeon has been unable to trace it. But I know what he thinks. He thinks that it has passed into the bowels and that I will die." Friday, June 3rd, 2 days after Cold Harbor. "We moved yesterday in ambulances, the enemy occupying the ground 1 hour after we left. Jack Wood," I'm assuming that's a comrade, "stuck his head in the ambulance last night and inquired for me. I was almost dead. He immediately commenced rousing me. This morning, Lieutenant Long of General Bartlett's staff brought in, racked up in army wagons for White House this PM. Saturday, June 4th. Moved last night from hospital and army wagons for White House. That's White House on the Pamunkey, the Union base of operations. The driver is drunk. We came near dying. The train bivouacked 3 miles from west. Moved in the morning after Lieutenant Long and self gone. The surgeon, in his knowledge of duty, had been stopped by 2 corps train, carried to hospital, borne on stretcher to steamer Winona. June 5th, he finally makes it to a larger hospital for treatment. So 4 days from the time that he was wounded on the battlefield until he gets to a hospital for greater care after the operation. So the soldier, in fact, survives his hip wound. And here he is. This is Edward Hill of the 16th Michigan Infantry. You can see him here. He's wearing his Corps badge, and it's quite a nice Corps badge, large, appears to be made of silver, perhaps. You can see some ribbonette attached to the top of it. He goes on, I believe he's a captain, goes on to become lieutenant colonel of the regiment, and lives a long life, although he's incapacitated. One account says he's crippled for life. But he does go on, and he receives the Medal of Honor for that day, June 1st, 1864, at Cold Harbor. So that's the story of Ed Hill. You can read more about him in the next issue. So, tip of the cap to Ed Hill. Now, if you're watching Callens Auctions, you're looking at the November 15th. I believe it's November 15th. I've got that written down here somewhere. Yeah, November 15th, an auction of Civil War, military history photographs, other relics. You'll see these two tintypes. This is President Jefferson Davis and Verena Howell Davis over here. These are from the John OBrien collection, and they are truly unique. And I want to tell you that John shared those images with us back in the summer of 2016. So 3 years ago is when these images made their debut. Previous to that time, they were sitting in some secure location that John had, and had not been seen in something like 40 years. John bought these images from a family in Connecticut, and the family goes all the way back to the Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Wells. Gideon Wells had a son that was in the Army, and towards the end of the war was on the staff, I believe, of EOC Ord, and wound up taking the residence in Jefferson Davis's home, the White House in Richmond. And of some of the possessions that came into the hands of the family at that point were these pair of tintypes. And so now you know the provenance of these photographs. If you're interested, go look up the summer 2016 issue of Military Images. We have fully documented the provenance, and we wrote all about it. So if you're interested in knowing more about these images, of course, if you're interested in bidding on them and want to check out the provenance, I definitely recommend giving the story a read. We went to painstaking detail to verify every little bit of it. So there you have it. Now, I'm going to leave you on a technical note. I was working with Perry Frone on his next column, our new column about fakes. And Perry is he's digging right in. His first column was in our current issue, the autumn issue. And he talked about how you can develop your sixth sense. And he recommended some books. He talked about his experience and what he's going to share with us in issues to come. So I'm not going to give away his next column, except for one little part of it. He talks about some tools that you can use, and he's talking about having a really good magnifying glass, a good pocket microscope, as you'll see him reference to. And one of the ones that he's recommending, I went out because I'm thinking I don't really have a great magnifying glass. I take them to shows, I leave them on the table, I lose them, and then I go get another one that's not that expensive. So I thought, you know what, let me check out what Perry's recommending. And I spent all of $6.95 for this one. This is here it is right here. It's the Kingmas Mini 60X microscope magnifying with LED UV light pocket jewelry magnifier. It's also good for currency. So this thing, I get this box, I open it up, and the first thing that I get is this little magnifier, which is really good. I mean, it's high quality. It does the job. But the real showstopper is in this faux leather case. This thing is tiny. You can stick it in your shirt pocket, in your pants pocket, but here it is, just like it looks in the picture. And if you open up, there's basically two sides. This side is the light. This side is the lens. It's got a little telescope that pops up. See if I can get this up. Yeah, it pops up a little bit there. And you can look at it. And then down here is a little switch. And there's that LED light, which is great. And it's pretty powerful. If you want more, go the other way. Oh, and there's the LED. So this thing is really powerful. They call it a currency microscope. And man, you can see right down to the tiny threads of the currency of dollar bills and things like that. So, gosh, Perry, thank you for the recommendation. I had fun looking for this, and if you're an Amazon shopper, I use Amazon Prime, so $6.95 plus tax, and I'm looking forward to taking this to a show, and I may make sure I keep it in my pocket. So speaking of shows, I will hopefully see some of you in Richmond. I'm hoping to get down there. I won't be setting up, but that's in mid-November. I'm going to go down for the day, so I hope to see you at the show in Richmond, Virginia. If I don't see you there, if you happen to go to Franklin in Tennessee, outside of Nashville, that's the early December show. That's one of the big shows, and so I highly recommend. It's a great show to meet and greet. We'll definitely be set up there along with the Civil War Photo Collector Society, Doug York and Civil War Faces. We're going to be there. We're going to be getting together for dinner on Friday night. More details on that to come. So stay tuned for all of that and more on the next episode of Military Images Live. I wish you all a great night and happy hunting. Take care. Bye.